Welcome back. Tonight we're diving into some of the most dramatic Reddit stories. Toxic family, crazy roommates, and people who completely lost their minds. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. Am I in the wrong for thinking my girlfriend's request to postpone weekly workouts with my friend was unreasonable? My girlfriend Mia, 21F, and I, 25M, have been dating for a couple of months and we are in a long-distance relationship. While we were still getting to know each other, we talked about past relationships. So I told her about my first and only girlfriend before her, Jess, 26F. Jess and I dated on and off from ages 12 to 17. She often broke up with me, blocked me, and then got back together. When we weren't dating, we still stayed close and were intimate. Even after we ended things for good, she remained my best friend, even though she didn't always treat me well. I asked Mia if she was jealous because she seemed quieter than usual. She said she doesn't know Jess well enough to be jealous and that her reaction was only based on what I told her. She said Jess doesn't sound like a nice friend or a nice girlfriend. I told her that she just doesn't know her the way I do and that she doesn't have to worry about anything. When Mia bought her ticket, I excitedly told all my friends because I wanted them to meet her. Jess said she was excited to meet Mia and suggested that we could show her around town. This made Mia really upset because she said the way I described it made her feel like Jess and I were the we and she would be the third wheel. I apologized and that was that. A few weeks later, Jess spontaneously asked me to work out. Afterward, we agreed to make it a weekly thing. When I told my girlfriend, she said it made her uncomfortable. I told her that we're just working out and holding each other accountable to do it every week. Mia asked what she's supposed to do when she comes to visit and it's one of our workout days. I told her that she can just come with us and work out. Mia said that still sounds like she's the third wheel. She said it makes her feel like Jess and I are the couple, not her and me. I reassured her that it's not like that and we're just working out. She then asked why Jess's fiancé doesn't work out with her. I texted Jess and she said it was because of his work schedule. Mia then asked if Jess would be okay with her joining. I asked Jess and she said she wasn't comfortable with another woman being there. I told my girlfriend it wasn't a big deal and maybe Jess was just self-conscious. My girlfriend then reminded me that when she wanted to go to a concert with a guy friend or go watch a movie, I told her I don't trust that friend and she respected my wishes and didn't go. I told her it was different because I know what guys can be like, and this is just working out. I told her it feels like she's accusing me and Jess of doing something shady. Mia said she wasn't judging me or Jess. She simply doesn't know Jess yet and isn't comfortable, the same way I wasn't comfortable with her guy friends. She asked if we could meet in the middle and if I could wait until she met Jess and got to know her before continuing the weekly workouts. I told her that was unfair to Jess and that she just needs to accept the way things are. She cried and hung up. She hasn't talked to me for days. Am I in the wrong? My husband lied about being deathly allergic to a certain food. When I met my husband and we started dating, he told me that he was deathly allergic to a certain food. We avoided certain restaurants on dates. He was always careful what he ordered when we ate out. And the first time I cooked for him, I completely removed that food from my apartment and thoroughly cleaned my kitchen. He showed me his EpiPen and explained how to use it. When we moved in together, we made sure there was one in the house, one in the car, and I always kept one in my purse. My family knows about the allergy and they avoid using that food at family events. My husband has always been extra careful about what he eats. Last weekend, for my brother's birthday, my sister-in-law made dinner. One of my nephews has a different allergy, and my sister-in-law is very careful about keeping both him and my husband safe. She gave us 2 containers of leftovers, and the one for my husband had a different colored lid. When my husband ate the wrong leftovers, both me and my sister-in-law panicked. My husband had always said that even having his food prepared with utensils that touched the food he was allergic to would be enough to cause a deadly reaction. He told me stories of it happening when he was a kid, but he ate the wrong dish and nothing happened. He confessed to me and my family that he was never allergic. He just doesn't like that particular food. When he went to university, he started saying he was allergic because it was easier than looking like a picky eater. His mom died before I met him. His parents were divorced, And until he was an adult, he didn't see his dad much because his dad lived in another province. So his dad, his friends, and even his own family believed he was allergic. The panic I felt when I thought he had eaten something that could kill him is something I can never fully describe. My sister-in-law thought she had almost killed him. I can't believe he has been lying to me since the day we met. I just need to get this off my chest. I am extremely angry at him right now. Don't start a meeting by ending the meeting. My work environment was less an environment and more a mess of duct tape, spit, and constant swearing. Among many other things, I managed a set of rentals, accounts receivable, and customer database analysis. Essentially, our company's bus factor was far too high. Another important part of my job was handling various legal documents that the state requires careful processes for, with either a digital or physical paper trail. I chose digital. My boss kindly provided me a very old dual-core computer that he found at a bargain warehouse for about $40. I had the most sophisticated workstation in the business for context. This wasn't enough for database management and analytical software to even open properly, so I called our IT guy. He worked for the boss's friend's sister-in-law's business, 200 miles away. I said, "Hey Tim, I need to add my personal laptop to the company network. Can you make that happen?" "Sure. I'll be down to that location in a week or two." "Can it wait?" "Sounds perfect, Tim." Tim showed up. We got the boss to approve everything, and I got remote access to the servers along with some annoying corporate-mandated security on my laptop. No big deal, they stayed out of the way. We didn't have any kind of software policy. Some computers still had Office 2007 installed, which was outdated and made data transfer difficult. It was the 2010s. There was no need for that. I did all of my work on a Google Drive account tied to my work email. This was great because I could work from wherever the boss decided to put me that day. Sometimes he treated me like a secretary and stuck me in his office. Sometimes he treated me like a technician and put me at a station with no computer at all. Data was flexible. Things had been tense. I had moved almost all of my work to digital, and the boss thought that meant I wasn't doing anything. An employee with no papers must not have enough work, in his mind. He wasn't completely wrong. I had been automating things and was effectively doing the work of about 6 people. How could I do the job of 6 people without him knowing? Easy. He managed by the seat of his pants. One day he fired a maintenance person and just rolled that job into the receptionist, driver, and technician roles. Another day he decided the sales team could handle marketing. Buying a single $2,000 camera was cheaper than hiring professionals every week. Guerrilla-style sales videos were trendy, he said. It would be great. After 2 years of this, I had accumulated a large number of tedious jobs. With the right tools, which I built myself at home on my personal laptop that could connect to the network, a 4-hour job could be finished in about 10 minutes of sorting and processing data. Then the time came. One of the higher-ups tipped me off that someone had suggested to the boss that a pair of part-time receptionists could do my work for less money. Just hire some college kids for 18 hours a week each. It would be perfect. Knowing that, I backed up everything to my personal Google Drive account, but I didn't delete anything from the company one. The state has an interest in these records, and I didn't trust the company to maintain them properly. I didn't want to be responsible for missing documents years later, so I kept a copy. I expected it to go smoothly. I was called to the main office for a meeting. There were too many people in suits, and my supervisor gave me a look. It wasn't a surprise. I carefully logged out of all locations on my Google account and put my laptop in my car before going upstairs. The meeting started with the boss saying, "Well, kiddo." Yes, he called me kiddo. Since I wasn't 60 years old, I was obviously a child. "Well, kiddo, I'm sad to say that I was wrong. I shouldn't have hired you. You're fired." That was blunt and rude. I stood up, extended my hand across the table, and prepared to thank him for the last few years. "Not so fast. Sit down. We have things to discuss." I sat back down, briefly shocked. Adrenaline kicked in and my fingertips went cold. The boss began listing everything they needed from me. Contacts, account statuses, explanations for discrepancies, documentation for the state. All things that, as his competent employee, I could have prepared and left on his desk in minutes. but he had already fired me. Where I live, either side can end employment for any reason. He had legally fired me. I replied, "Well, boss, I don't feel particularly comfortable accessing your network since I'm not an employee." He exploded. Imagine a wealthy, entitled person with a short temper who wants to act tough but doesn't quite pull it off. He yelled, spit flew, and he followed me all the way to my car, demanding that other employees form a barrier. He called me several times. The calls went to voicemail while I drove to a public Wi-Fi hotspot. I carefully removed my laptop from their network. I drove home, unpacked my lunch, and my phone kept ringing nonstop. Eventually, I answered a call from his cell phone. He made demands. I casually offered to come back and work for him at 10 times my previous rate. He yelled some more. An hour later, he was pounding on my door. I didn't want to deal with that. I knew he carried a loaded pistol in his car. The police escorted him away, and I emailed a copy of my security footage to the responding officer. He thanked me. The company didn't collapse, of course. The boss is a millionaire and had been carefully losing tens of thousands of dollars a year while running the business. He may have lost a bit more after I left. That wasn't my concern. My concern was collecting unemployment. I had been fired just a few days before fall college registration. I decided to take a few master's level classes. I already had my bachelor's degree, so I figured I might as well continue school on the state's dime. Classes went well. I used a bit of savings to get through the spring semester. Then the pandemic hit, and my unemployment benefits were extended. I took summer classes. Those extended benefits were at 3 times the normal rate. I took a full load of fall classes too. Then the state extended benefits again for another 3 months at double the base rate. I already had the winter session sign-up date marked on my calendar. The boss called me this morning. I politely thanked him for firing me without cause a year earlier and let him know I had made the dean's list the previous semester. He told me to leave him alone and said he was calling to take me up on my earlier offer. He would hire me at 5 times my old rate for some information. I reminded him, wasn't the deal 10 times my rate? He said 5 times was too much and he only needed me for an afternoon. Well, I've been thinking about it. My unemployment benefits run out in a week or 2, so I'll do it. I'll contract for you. I want 20 times what I was making, 40 hours minimum, paid in advance, and a written scope of work. I'm only doing the work we agree on during negotiations. He refused and said 5 times for 1 day was final. No thanks, boss. I have to get back to the classes you're helping pay for. Thanks again. I hung up. An hour later, he called back. Actually, it was his daughter, the company's comptroller. She said she had talked some sense into him. He would hire me at 20 times my rate for 40 hours of work, half paid up front. Actually, it was 100% up front, not half. She agreed. Then she started explaining what needed to be done. It turned out they were failing a state audit quite badly. The kind of badly that could cost the boss his millionaire status if it wasn't fixed. They already had all the information they needed, of course. It was sitting in my old company Google Drive account. I wasn't going to tell them that. Once he paid me for half a year's work, I would gladly spend an hour transferring the data to a flash drive, wait until the following Monday, and hand it to the receptionist. Really, the man couldn't have been nicer. He had already covered me going to college full-time for over a year and was about to cover another 2 semesters. I should buy him a cake. Update. I got another call. They decided the daughter/comptroller would be the main point of contact, which was fine with me. We had always gotten along. The main issue is information they can't find. That's basically no work at all. But because they can't find it, the auditors are nitpicking every small detail that my replacements have mishandled. From the way she described it, it sounds like a complete mess. Honestly, it sounds like 1 solid day of work going through their server with some of my old tools. Maybe 2 days. She wanted me to start immediately while they finished writing the contract. I gave a short laugh and said no. Contract first, and I'll make sure they pass the audit perfectly the way I always used to. But there's a deadline. I work fast. You don't understand. We only have until the end of the month. This needs to start today. I work fast. And it sounds like you should also hire someone who knows how to write contracts quickly. Whatever. If you don't fix this, You know what, never mind. I'll email you something in the morning. Sounds like a plan. Good night. Update. Well, here we are. Sorry for the delay. I had to do the work while also preparing some pretty heavy coursework for my degree. In any event, here we are. The short version is that I got paid significantly more than the boss thinks I'm worth, and the boss gets to keep his business. Unfortunately, the boss decided that I should be under a non-disclosure agreement. So I am. I can't really discuss much, but there are some details I can share. There was an audit that failed because of my replacement's abilities. It was a routine audit where they request some specific files and also randomly choose various filing cabinets to examine and compare the paper records to the official accounts. This happens once a month. When that audit failed, it triggered a penalty and a more in-depth audit. It was this second audit they were having serious problems with. I managed to get Tim to reinstate my company email account, and therefore my Google Drive. They had only changed the password, so that was easy. The account had never been deleted. Tim explained that their email system is based on a package of users. They can't go over a certain total number of users, but they sit comfortably below that limit. So they just keep old email addresses inactive since it doesn't cost them anything. When they need a new one, they simply delete an abandoned address and reissue it. I don't know why that's their policy, but it worked out this time. I recovered my tools and spent a fair amount of time updating them so they would work again. Turns out this is very much a use it or lose it skill. The bulk of my time was spent in the archives, going through unsorted filing cabinets. When my replacement couldn't handle the workload, the boss hired a part-time high school student to help around the office with easier tasks. Things like sorting incoming documents, making 2 or 3 photocopies of everything and putting them in the right folders, creating new folders, clearing out old folders once a month, shredding documents, all the boring, time-consuming work. Well, the high school student thought that was a waste of time. Their filing method was to start in Cabinet 1, put a single new folder in it, and fill that folder until it was full. Then move to the next drawer and the next, and so on. So all the papers that had been filed were simply sorted in the chronological order of when they were handed to the temporary worker. That was a complete mess. And the photocopies? Don't even get me started. I spent more than 20 hours contacting outside companies, customers, and clients, asking them to please send us a copy of the original. And the few times an original was missing or had been shredded, I would bet I had to reach out to the government or whatever agency had issued it and jump through all their hoops to get it reissued. Sometimes that cost hundreds of dollars. Eventually, I had all the documentation I needed. I began digitizing everything and then ran it through my tools. Things broke a few times, but nothing that a bit of searching online couldn't fix. Everything was sent to the auditors. They were satisfied. A report was submitted. That part was done. Well, mostly done. By this point, I had worked a bit over 2 weeks and had collected the equivalent of about 18 times my old weekly pay. That felt reasonably fair, considering regular employees received full health insurance and other benefits. I hadn't seen the boss even once while I was there. I was supposed to stop working either at the end of the month or when the audit passed. The audit passed before the end of the month, and the comptroller approached me about creating a standardized set of procedures for how to do my old job. We discussed it and came to an agreement. I would create the procedures while working from my home office, or come in if I needed physical access to something, and bill them for 40 hours per week, with a review of the work completed each week. We agreed that my rate would be roughly 5 times what I had been making as an employee. Things went surprisingly smoothly. The first week I spent a few hours creating a presentation of my plan, which was basically to give them my code. The second week I billed them for development and shared some screenshots of a basic function. I managed to stretch that out for quite some time, eventually writing clear, high-quality instructions on how to use the code and why it works. Finally, I moved the code over to their server and set up a computer with a shortcut to it. I'm now completely finished with the job, and I celebrated by buying a new mountain bike. Am I in the wrong for calling my mom a liar after finding out my dad is not my biological father? I, 28F, was raised by my mother and spent most of my childhood visiting my dad every 2 weeks and on certain holidays. My dad is no longer in my life. The last time I heard from him was about 12 years ago, but the reasons for that falling out aren't relevant to this story. My dad used to tell my sisters that the reason he and my mom divorced was because of an affair that happened around the time I was conceived. He told them that he had always been suspicious that I was not his biological daughter. Nothing was ever said to me directly. I look nothing like my dad, and I have some medical conditions that are genetic and don't seem to come from either my mom's or my dad's side of the family. About a month ago, I decided I wanted to find out the truth. I took an ancestry DNA test. Last night, I got the results. Not a single member of my dad's side of the family showed up. Instead, there were a lot of people I had never heard of on my paternal side. One of those relatives shared more DNA with me than my sister does. I found her on social media and got in touch. It turned out her father had worked at the college my mother was attending the year I was conceived. Through some simple deduction, we realized she was my half-sister and that man was my biological father. When I called my mom to ask her about this, I made it clear that I wasn't angry. Her marriage was her business, and I was just looking for answers. She claimed she had never been with anyone outside of her marriage, and that the ancestry test must not be very accurate. I chose not to confront her further at that moment. I wanted to gather more information and calm down before trying again. A few hours later, she called me back. This time she said she had time to think about it and that she did remember being surprised by her pregnancy with me because she hadn't been very intimate with my dad during that period. She said she was really disturbed because she doesn't know who that man is and is worried she may have been a victim. I lost my patience at that point. I was disgusted that she was trying to make herself the victim instead of taking responsibility and giving me the answers I deserve. I called her a liar. She started crying and hung up the phone. My husband says I was way too harsh with her and that I put too much pressure on her out of the blue. He thinks I should have been gentler and reassured her that I'm not angry. Maybe he's right, but honestly I am angry, so I'm not sure. Additional context. My mom has a long history of lying compulsively. We have been working on our relationship for about a year, but she is almost incapable of taking accountability for the difficult childhood she gave us. I would be more inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt if this didn't fit so perfectly with her character. Plus, my dad already told my sisters he knew about the affair. For those asking about my biological father's position at the university, he worked in the kitchen, not as a professor. My mom was 25 at the time. 10.5 months later. Hello. I decided to do an update as the situation changed a lot and IMO got super crazy, so for anyone who is interested in this story, here is how things played out. After I got off the phone with my mom the day I confronted her, I texted her and told her I'm sorry for the way I reacted and that I just needed some time and space to process and try to figure things out. I spoke with my new half-sister about what my mom said. Super awkward conversation. Telling her that my mom is claiming that her beloved late father may have done something sinister to her. And she said absolutely not, that her father was a kind and gentle man and would never do something like this. I apologized and spent the rest of the conversation asking for more details about who he was and what his life was like. It was actually quite lovely. I didn't speak to my mom again for weeks. I just didn't know how to move forward. I didn't really believe her, but had no way of knowing for sure. It was super weird. Do I just accept her explanation and try to move forward in my relationship with her? Or do I step away from her, potentially destroying the relationship with my mother when she was telling the truth the whole time? About a month later, I received an email from her. In this email, she told me a story. She said that she's been thinking a lot about everything and she started going through her old files from that time in her life. She said she found a therapy record for my sister that was dated 1 week after my conceived date. She said at that time she was working at a daycare, and she would take my 2 older sisters to work with her where they would be watched by other staff members in a different room. She said one day she found out one of my sisters was being SA'd by a staff member. I found out later through my sister that this was very true, and she remembers it happening. My mom says she absolutely lost it in the daycare's kitchen, throwing stuff and screaming until she finally shut herself into a closet. She said she remembers the daycare's cook opening the door and offering her a ride home, and she doesn't remember anything after that. She went on in her email, telling me how traumatic it was for all of them, and that's why she blacked the next several weeks of her life out. But maybe I can figure out if he ever worked there and if the cook was my bio father. I was able to verify through my half-sister that he was working in that daycare the year I was born and was even able to see some pictures of him working there. So I was finally getting some answers, but I still felt like her story had a lot of holes in it. Like, did she take her two young girls, minutes after finding out about this type of abuse, and immediately invite this person who she barely knows into her bed? That feels weird. And the only way I feel like that would make sense is if she knew him better, which would imply that she would at the very least recognize him from a photo taken at the time he was working there. Or did she call him later and meet up with him? But that would, again, imply more of a relationship and she should have some memory of him. I decided to call her and try again for an open conversation. During this phone call, I told her I was able to verify he was the cook, and I showed her the photos. She continued to say she has no memory of him. I told her about my confusion with her story, and this is where things started to get really bad. She started crying, saying she will pay for a lie detector test, that she will go to a hypnotherapist to access repressed memories. She said maybe if I had more background info about her life, I'd understand how she could have blocked these memories off. She went on to tell me in graphic detail about when she was raped at 13 and how my grandma didn't believe her. How my grandma was a terrible mom. For context, I love my grandmother dearly and was the single best thing about my childhood, and she forced her to get an abortion when she was 17. She explained my sister's essay at the daycare in graphic detail as well. She cried and expressed how terrified she was to lose me. I got off the phone with her feeling violated, disturbed. It felt really icky though. I decided that day that I was going to have to come to terms with the fact that I will never know how I conceived and if my mom was being truthful. As luck would have it, 2 weeks later I ran into one of my old stepdads. We chatted for a minute and I decided to ask him. He was with my mom when I was between the ages of about 7 to 17. I was very careful about how I asked. I said, "What do you know about my father?" His response, "Oh good, your mom finally told you about you bio dad." That answered all my questions for me. He knew where he lived, that they worked together, and that I have his eyes. I called my mom again, told her I know the truth and it's time to be honest. She continued to insist that she has no idea who he is or how this happened. I told her that using my sister's very real trauma and giving me such graphic details of her own essay as manipulation tactics in an attempt to distract from her lies is deeply disturbing behavior, and a close relationship with her was not serving me at this point. Many weeks later, I got another message from her. It was very long and went on and on about how hard this has been for her and that she needs to know if our relationship is salvageable. She said it's been so hard on her that the night we last spoke, she drank 2 bottles of NyQuil, and that her husband found her and made her throw up, for which she was grateful. When I was 17, my younger stepsister committed suicide, and I found her when she was still barely alive. She died in my arms. My mom knows how this statement would affect me. I responded telling her that I'm sorry it's been so hard for her to be a victim of her own actions, that in that novel of a text message, there was not a single indication of accountability or remorse for the way she's handled things, and that it's incredibly fucked up to use my past traumatized with suicide as weapon to elicit sympathy. I told her that only thing that can even begin to fix this is accountability and a genuine apology, and until she can do that, not to contact me again. She sent another long message, admitting she lied about knowing who my father is, saying she was trying to protect me from the truth, which is that she was raped and that's how I was conceived. Since then, my sister has done enough digging to get several family members' testimony that she had a very consensual and extended affair with the cook from her job, as well as a few other affairs from the same time frame. After this, I told her to leave me alone and blocked her number. There have been a few other things. My grandmother came to see me to try to advocate for her. Her husband has made a few attempts to reach out, etc. But I feel like it's over now. I'm left with feelings of deep sadness that my mom couldn't find the courage to show up and be a mom for me, that I still have not been able to just have a talk with her about how I came into the world, and knowing that I will never know the man, who by all accounts I've received, was a really amazing human. At the end of it all, I've had my mom, my dad, my bio dad, 3 stepfathers and a stepmom, and it's crazy to me that I sit here now writing this story without ever feeling like I've had parent. Thanks for hearing me out, Reddit. At least I don't wonder if I'm the AH anymore because my mother was in fact a liar. Am I in the wrong for cutting off my daughter after she had an affair with her sister's husband? I, 59F, have two daughters, Emma, 35F, and Chloe, 33F. Emma has been married to her husband, 36M, for 11 years, and they have two children together. Chloe has been married to her husband, 34M, for 8 years, and they have one 5-year-old son. About 6 weeks ago, Emma called me just after midnight, completely hysterical. She told me she had suspected for months that her husband was hiding something. He had become distant, constantly guarded his phone, and was always finding excuses to stay late at work. That night, after he fell asleep beside her, she looked through his phone for the first time. She found years of explicit messages between him and Chloe. The affair had been going on for almost 4 years. Emma was devastated. She kept asking me how her own sister could do this to her. A few days later, we were at my brother's birthday party when Emma confronted Chloe outside. Chloe denied everything at first and insisted Emma had misunderstood. When Emma said she had read the messages herself, Chloe completely fell apart. She started crying, admitted the affair, and kept repeating, "I don't know why I did it. I'm so sorry. It was the biggest mistake of my life." Emma asked how 4 years could possibly be a mistake. Chloe had no answer. The argument escalated into a screaming match. Chloe tried to slap Emma, but several relatives stepped in before she could. Chloe's husband quietly took their son home after realizing what had happened. Within days, he told Chloe he wanted a divorce. Emma also filed for divorce after her husband admitted everything. After it all came out, Chloe called me 82 times in one day. I answered once because I hoped she was calling to explain herself. Instead, she cried the entire time, begging me not to abandon her. She said she had already lost her husband, was probably going to lose shared custody of her son, and couldn't bear losing her mother too. She said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness but begged me not to hate her forever. I told her I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. I said this wasn't one bad decision. It was years of lying to her sister, her husband, and the rest of us. I told her I loved her because she's my daughter, but I didn't want contact with her for the foreseeable future. Since then, I've ignored every attempt she's made to reach out. This is where my family thinks I'm wrong. My sisters say Chloe has already lost everything. Her marriage, her relationship with her sister, many of her friends, and likely the family she dreamed of giving her son. They say she's genuinely remorseful, has started individual therapy, and isn't trying to justify what she did. They argue that if a mother won't stand by her child after they've hit rock bottom, who will? They also remind me that cutting Chloe off means my grandson is growing up without his grandmother, even though he's done nothing wrong. I understand all of that, but every time I think about welcoming Chloe back into my life, I picture Emma reading those messages alone in the middle of the night, realizing that 2 of the people she trusted most had been lying to her for years. I don't know if I can move past that. My family says I'm punishing Chloe forever for something she already deeply regrets. I feel like I'm simply refusing to pretend it never happened. Am I in the wrong? I know a lot of people are used to seeing cheating stories and always thinking they are fake. But what would you do if you were in my shoes? Update. I know it's very early for me to post an update, and I wasn't planning on it, but after reading the comments on my first post, I decided I needed one final conversation with Chloe before I completely closed the door. I went to her house yesterday. I expected her to be emotional after calling me 82 times in one day, but she was surprisingly calm. I asked her the one question I still couldn't understand. Why? She admitted she had been attracted to Emma's husband for years. She said what started as admiration eventually became feelings, and over time they crossed a line. Instead of ending it, they kept convincing themselves it would be the last time. She insisted she regretted everything. I asked if she had spoken to Emma. She told me the only contact she'd had was one text before Emma blocked her on everything. Emma told her she had destroyed their family, taken away her children's stable home, and that she hoped the affair had been worth losing a sister forever, because as far as she was concerned, Chloe no longer had one. Emma blocked her immediately afterward. Chloe also admitted she later waited outside the school gates hoping to speak to Emma when she came to collect the kids. Emma refused to speak to her, warned her to stay away from her and the children, and told her that if she ever approached them again, she would regret it. Chloe left crying. I told Chloe that waiting outside the school was completely inappropriate, regardless of her intentions. She insisted she only wanted to apologize and prove she still cared about Emma. I then asked if she truly felt remorse. That's when I completely lost my patience. Instead of taking full responsibility, Chloe started telling me that Emma's marriage had already been falling apart, that Emma and her husband had been drifting apart for years, and that he often confided in her. She admitted the affair was wrong, but repeatedly tried to place part of the blame on Emma, saying that if their marriage had been happier, none of this would have happened. I was furious. I honestly couldn't believe I had raised someone capable of thinking like that. I told her there is no marriage bad enough to justify secretly having an affair with your own sister's husband for 4 years. I told her I wasn't just disappointed. I was ashamed that she was my daughter. The more she tried to justify herself, the angrier I became. The conversation eventually turned to her own divorce. She talked about how difficult everything had been for her and how her husband still plans to move to Washington with their son to be closer to his family. She said she may have to move there too if she wants to stay close to him. As she spoke, I realized almost everything was about what she had lost. Her marriage, her home, her reputation, and possibly seeing her son every day. Very little of it was about Emma or the damage she had caused. At the end of the conversation, Chloe asked if we were cool now. I told her no. We were not cool, and we might never be. I said that if I ever found it in my heart to reconcile with her, it would be on my terms and in my own time, not because she thought one conversation could erase 4 years of lies and betrayal. I walked out feeling angrier than when I arrived. I honestly don't know what to do anymore. I love both of my daughters, but after that conversation, I'm not convinced Chloe truly understands the pain she's caused. The cassette player that appeared on our doorstep. Last week, a cassette player appeared at our doorstep. I never should have given it to my husband. Simon got the call around midnight. I rolled closer to him, draped my arm across his chest, and listened by the receiver. It was the penitentiary. A guard had discovered Celeste sprawled out on the floor of her cell, cold and pulseless. His mother was dead. I smiled. She finally got what she deserved. When Simon was young, Celeste trapped him in the cellar of his childhood home. She confined him to a windowless room with only a mattress, a bucket, and a record player. Every day was identical. Listening to the same record on an endless loop, from dawn until dusk, from the moment he woke up to the moment he fell asleep. Celeste melted the vinyl before the police could get their hands on it, so only Simon knows what it sounded like. He doesn't like to talk about it, and I love him, so I don't pry. When the call was over, he threw his feet over the edge of our bed and put his head in his hands. Honestly, I expected indifference, or relief, something vaguely positive. Instead, Simon wept, fat tears and convulsive sobs, well into the early morning. I held on to him, silent and warm. I didn't ask questions. There would be time for questions later. Then the package arrived. I found it lying on our front stoop. The return address was Simon's childhood home. Holding the small brown envelope felt like molding a snowball without gloves. A burning cold, phantom needles digging into my palm. I tore it open and pulled out its contents. There was no letter, just an antique cassette player, shaped like a shoebox, with sleek gray plastic and a little handlebar below the buttons. I popped the cassette compartment. Empty. I slid the player under my armpit and marched over to the garbage can. Simon had endured enough. This thing, whatever it represented, would surely reopen old wounds. I lifted the lid and held the player over the hole, but my fingers refused to let go. Was this right? Could I really make this decision for him? The woman never hurt Simon physically. When the police rescued him, he was healthy. Scared and vitamin D deficient, yes, but well-nourished, hydrated, and intact. Celeste's public defender argued that Simon could have escaped at any time because she kept the door unlocked. Maybe she had been a loving mother, despite her delusions. I had no idea, and I suppose that's the point. Only Simon and Celeste knew what transpired in that windowless room. But apparently there had been enough love left for him to shed tears over her death. I sighed, slid the player back under my armpit, and brought the thing into our home. So what is it? I mean, I know what it is, but why do you think she had it sent? Simon asked, carefully setting it onto his desk. Couldn't tell you. Whoever's managing her affairs didn't send an explanation. Or maybe it's just coming separately dash. He pressed play. A snap echoed through the room, followed by the mechanical whirring of the flywheels spinning without a tape. Simon's demeanor shifted. He shot upright, rigid, flushed. His expression was a disturbing mixture of elation and terror, a sharp grin with bulging eyes. "What's that?" he shouted. I jumped, heart racing. I didn't say anything. His gaze darted between the cassette player and me, pupils dilating, spreading over the whites of his eyes like an oil spill. I started reaching out. "Store this in the attic for now." "No!" he screamed, snatching the machine and clutching it against his chest, nostrils flaring. The whirring meshed seamlessly with his labored breathing. I couldn't distinguish the two. Confusion suddenly clouded his features.
"Sorry, cut."
"I'm feeling a bit off." He loosened his grip on the machine, but only slightly. "But, I'll hold on to this. For now." I nodded, forced what I can only imagine was the world's weakest smile. "Yeah, okay. Just let me know what you need," I said, stepping out of his office. There was a pause, and then he said, Right, that makes sense." He was staring at the cassette player, cradling it in his arms like a newborn. The next few days I was nervous, constantly, incessantly nervous. Simon works from home doing graphic design, but I work 9 to 5 at an accounting firm. So every evening I'd be a wreck driving home, terrified about what could be waiting beyond our front door. But every night he was normal, cooking, cleaning, laughing, acting like his usual self. Slowly, with caution, I began to unwind. Felt like I had my best friend back. It was nice, but it was fake. And with each passing moment, the truth became harder and harder to deny. Something was wrong. The changes were small at first, small enough that my conscious mind couldn't grasp them. But the oldest parts of my nervous system, the prehistoric holdovers, could sense the danger swelling around me, even if they couldn't give it a name. It wasn't just Simon. The entire house was different, polluted, mutating. Then one night, I was lying in bed, eyes fluttering, thoughts loose, and a question popped into my brain. Where the hell was the cassette player? My eyes burst open. I looked over. Simon was turned away, motionless. "It's around," he groaned. "What?" "The cassette player, it's around." I struggled to breathe. Dread dripped through my lungs like hot tar. I hadn't said a thing. Just don't worry about it. He yawned, shifted, and stilled. I stared at his back, this dark statue resting in the blackness, and I wondered, was he actually sleeping? Or was he just pretending? Were his eyes wide open? I didn't check. Couldn't. I lay awake and listened to him breathe, convincing myself that everything was fine. Simon wasn't changing. He was grieving. I must have asked where the cassette player was out loud. There wasn't a soft whirring in the walls. It wasn't beneath the floorboards, or coming from inside our closet, or radiating from my husband's skin. I was just hearing things. The following morning, I was a mess. I couldn't think straight. My movements were restless and twitchy when the anxiety flared, then deadened and lurching when the sleep deprivation took hold. I stumbled through my routine. I reached toward my wardrobe but missed the handle. I nearly fell on my way to breakfast, lost in a haze while stepping a little too far forward, the ball of my foot just catching the edge of the stair. But the strangest part? The trip from our bedroom to the kitchen felt longer. I've lived in this house since I was a kid. I inherited it from my parents when they passed. I know the layout. My body has internalized every inch of that place. And I'm telling you, it was longer. When I got downstairs, he was at the table, stirring a cup of coffee, staring into space. "Where is it, Simon?" He turned his head and smiled. Something cold twisted in my chest. My husband was different. His lips were too thin. His usually hooked nose was slightly blunted. His green eyes were unnaturally bright, a synthetic, neon hue. Where's what? Are you alright, Cat? You don't look dash. Cut the crap. His smile widened. It's right there. I scoffed, preparing to really lay into him. But then he gestured toward the center of the table. And there it was, whirring, spinning, and empty. It hadn't been there a second ago. We need to get rid of that thing, Simon. I walked across the kitchen, knelt beside my husband, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Immediately, his demeanor shifted, arrogant and cold to scared and harmless in the blink of an eye. Even his facial features reverted to something closer to normal. His body was trembling. I slipped my hand up his neck and turned his chin toward me. I spoke slowly. I'm going to take this thing away from us. He shook his head. His voice was shaking. No, you can't do that. I have to listen so we stay together. You can't throw it away. I felt my composure slipping, but I focused. Okay. Well, I'll hide it, I said, stroking his cheek. Hide it? Yes, I won't throw it away. I'll just put it somewhere safe. My hand crept toward the cassette player. He tracked the movement, but I pressed my other hand into his jaw, guiding his attention back to me. I've always wanted what's best for you, right? As soon as I touched the machine, a jolt of static flooded through my arm, crawling along my bones. I did not let go. Trust me, love. His trembling slowed. I won't throw it away. I promise. A lie, but a necessary one. Gradually, he nodded. Yeah, okay. I took a deep breath. It was now or never. I grabbed the cassette player and headed for the front door, determined to get the machine away from our home. The sound of Simon shooting upright made my spine stiffen. Before I could speed up, he brushed past me and stood at the door, positioning his body between me and the exit. I changed direction, took a sharp right and began climbing the stairs, gesturing for him to stay put. Thankfully, he listened. I ascended quickly. By the time I reached our bedroom, I was hyperventilating. Where could I hide it? I bolted across the room, dropped to my knees, and pulled a small lockbox out from beneath our bed. The player just barely fit inside. I secured the lock and shoved the box back under. A wave of dizziness hit me. I rested my head on the comforter and waited for it to pass. The lockbox was only a temporary solution. A permanent fix would require incapacitating Simon. I scrambled to my feet. An idea was forming. I pulled open my nightstand drawer and dug through the clutter until I found a bottle of prescription sleeping pills. The label was worn almost completely away, but when I shook it, the contents rattled. Plenty left. I unscrewed the cap and dropped the key to the lockbox inside the bottle. When I returned downstairs, Simon was still standing at the door. I tried to act normal. He'd only lower his guard if I stayed calm. Still, my thoughts kept drifting. My mind kept replaying the 2 trips, from the foyer to the bedroom, and from the bedroom back down to the foyer. They were different. The second trip was much longer. The upstairs hallway seemed to expand with my movements, unfurling before my eyes, silently adding more doors and floorboards with each step. It was as if the presence had grown tired of hiding. I've never experienced fear like that before. It was primal, all-consuming. But when I finally made it back to the foyer, I saw Simon, and I swallowed it down. I would not let it take him. So I forced a smile, told him I'd be calling out sick from work, took his hand, and pulled him into the living room. We spent the day watching old spy thrillers on the couch. During that time, I noticed that contact had a grounding effect on Simon. As long as I was touching him, he seemed to remain normal, his eyes their regular greenish hue. I was his anchor, but the measure was only temporary. As soon as I let go, his body would begin to distort, and the breathless whirring of the cassette player would resume, swirling around us like invisible smoke. Dusk came faster than I expected. The pills were burning a hole in my pocket. I needed to act before it was too late. I excused myself and began walking toward the kitchen fast, but not hurried, carefully maintaining the appearance of normality. I peeked over my shoulder. He was already changing. His lips were visibly thinning. Deep wrinkles accumulated across his face. He didn't move from the couch, but he kept his bright eyes glued to me. Once out of sight, my pace turned frantic. I rushed over to our liquor cabinet and threw it open. I staggered back, gripping my chest. The cabinet was empty, and it was dark. The inside seemed to go on for miles. A musty stench drifted from the opening, and if I squinted hard enough, I could almost see something distant in the darkness, dragging itself closer. I slammed it shut. "You all right in there?" he called out.
Yes.
I shouted, fighting the nausea. I stood before a massive wall of small doors that shouldn't have been able to fit in my kitchen. The cabinets were multiplying. The house was changing. I looked up. The ceiling hadn't grown to accommodate the changes, but when I looked back at the wall, it somehow appeared even larger than before. I couldn't understand it. I doubled over, clutching my head. My brain felt like it was boiling. Footsteps began coming from the living room, heavy, slow. The overhead lights flickered. Bulbs sizzled and popped, but they didn't dim. Their exposed filaments kept firing, flooding the room with harsh light. "You all right in there, Cat?" His voice was far too low. I forced myself upright and began ripping open cabinet after cabinet, finding only darkness, hole after hole, black openings spreading through my childhood home. Simon was closing in. His footsteps had become deafening. I opened what felt like the 100th door, and I got lucky. I grabbed a half-filled whiskey bottle by its neck. "Are you sure you're all right in there, Cat?" Simon began to round the corner. I didn't look. I didn't hesitate. I aimed the bottle where I imagined his head was about to be, and I swung. A sickening crash echoed through the air. Everything stopped. Simon collapsed. The kitchen plunged into darkness. Warm liquid dripped across my wrist. I let go. The shattered bottle clattered against the tiled floor. I looked around. The cabinets were normal again. The lights had quieted, and my husband lay in front of me, motionless, his hair slick and glistening with blood and alcohol. Muted sobs rose in my throat. I knelt down. His breathing was shallow, but it was there. Stepping over him was agonizing, but I couldn't stop. This was my chance. I bolted through the foyer and up the stairs, dialing 911 as I ran. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. I screamed that my husband needed an ambulance as I raced down the second-floor hallway. What was I going to do with the thing? I tore the lockbox from its hiding place and threw it onto the bed. Bury it? Burn it? Hand it to a priest? I ripped the pill bottle from my pocket and unscrewed the cap, dumping its contents into my shaking hands. Tablets scattered. Then the key. I jammed it into the lockbox. Right now, it doesn't matter. I don't need a plan. I'll figure it out once I've gotten the machine away from Simon. The lid creaked open. There was nothing inside. Mom said you'd try to do that. Simon stood in the doorway, completely naked, dried blood staining his cheeks. The cassette player was resting against his chest. He had his arms wrapped tightly around the machine, which was still empty, playing nothing, whirring endlessly. I didn't want to believe her, he sniffled. His eyes were glassy and burning bright green. I said, "You don't know Kat. She wouldn't lie to me." He uncrossed his arms. The machine did not fall. It did not move an inch. Moonlight streamed from a nearby window, illuminating him. The cassette player was fused to his chest. Thin red vessels swam through mounds of sealed skin, binding flesh and plastic together. But here you are, dead set on throwing her away, when you promised me you wouldn't. Simon, don't even say it, he screamed. I crept forward, reaching out. Contact had brought him back before. I can still fix this, I whispered. He retreated through the doorway, backpedaling with small, scurrying movements, never breaking eye contact, never blinking. I followed, gaining speed. Simon, please wait. Halfway down the hall, he twisted his arm behind his back and grabbed the handle of a tiny linen closet. My legs pumped. My heart pounded against my ribs. I was his anchor. I could bring him back. I just needed to reach him. The door creaked open. He squeezed inside. I stretched my hand out, grasping for him. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the handle. The door shut. I threw it back open. I should have seen my husband, contorted into a space no larger than a high school locker. Instead, I saw stairs. They were faintly visible in the hallway's moonlight, the silver outlines of wooden planks descending into darkness, accompanied by a splintered handrail. A cool draft seeped from the opening. The air smelled of mud and rot. I knew what I was looking at. Implicitly, I understood what was beyond the door. A cellar. If I entered the darkness, if I worked my way down those stairs, I would find a windowless room at the bottom. A soft, honey-sweet noise drifted up from deep within, so quiet it was nearly imperceptible. Pulled at me. My head couldn't have been more than a few centimeters over the edge. But that was enough. I heard the music so clearly, and I saw her, a wide-eyed face etched into the blackness, filled with a gentleness that could easily be mistaken for something far darker. Celeste began racing up the stairs. I jerked back and slammed the door shut. I stood there for a moment, frozen in perfect silence. Slowly, I opened the door again. All I saw were a few stacks of neatly folded pillowcases. The whirring was gone. Simon was gone. Some time later, sirens blared in the distance. The ambulance had finally arrived. When the medics asked where my husband was, I didn't have the strength to lie. I just pointed toward the front door and sat back down on the curb. So they searched the house. They didn't find anyone, of course. Simon's blood was still in the kitchen, but it wasn't fresh. It looked like an old stain, something that might have happened months or even years earlier. I assumed that stain would get me arrested for his murder. It was still his blood, after all. But then they asked me one simple question. What did you say your husband's name was, ma'am? It's Dash. I paused. I tried again. His name is Dash. Nothing. I racked my brain, scoured my memories. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with his name. I can see his face clear as day. But his name? It's gone. Vanished along with him, his mother, and any proof he ever existed. I have no photographs of him. His side of the closet is empty. Simon is just a placeholder, a label that eases the pain. Whatever his name was, all I have left of him is a stain and some memories. Memories of our life together, of a pitch-black cellar, of a song drifting out of the darkness. I only heard a second of it, but the song is indescribably beautiful. Imagine the sound of your child taking their first breath. Multiply that joy by 1,000, and maybe you'll begin to understand what I experienced. I can still hear it. The song drifts through my vacant home, curling around the ruins of my life, testing me, but I will not fail him. Not again. So every night, I stand in front of the linen closet, terrified and pleading. I beg. I open the door. I shut it. I wait. I beg. I open the door. I shut it. And I know one day they'll take me. I just have to be patient. So please, Simon, Celeste, whoever you both are, have mercy. Don't leave me alone up here.